Okay. So we're on page 3 of my handout. This is the fourth law in 10th chapter, the laws of Teshuva of the Rambam. So we ended up yesterday with where my voice is going. We ended up yesterday with the discussion of Lishma. Lishma, I don't know if I have a good translation of Lishma, because the word in its literal translation would mean for its own sake, but as I told you, that's not what it means. To do any mitzvah, Lishma, is to do it for the love of the Lord of the entire earth who commanded it. That's how the Rambam defines Lishma, and I told you that no one disagrees with that. And Nefesh HaChaim, it tells you how you should study Torah, what your mental set should be when studying Torah. It doesn't disagree with this. Now, he says, that's the goal, and for educated people who get to a certain point of sophistication, that's what you teach them, and other people only taught to do it for the sake of reward as an interim until they get to that stage of development. But, he says, nevertheless, our sages declared, a person should always occupy himself with the Torah, even when it is not Lishma, because if he does so, when it's not Lishma, he will come to do it Lishma. He will come to do it with a higher goal, a higher level of doing it out of love for the Lord of the entire earth who commanded to do it. Now, this is a very strong statement. As one of the commentaries point out, it says always, should always occupy himself with it, not Lishma. The very least, that means that you can't skip that stage. If you think you've just come to love God, then you're fooling yourself. There's got to be a stage where you do it out of a selfish motivation, and then out of which you grow to do it Lishma. Now, when I first came across that statement in the Talmud, I had two problems with it. First of all, it seems to me I know counterexamples. I know people, let's say, there are certain people who teach Jewish studies in universities, even Talmud, let's say, their whole lives. They're doing it Shalol Lishma, right? They're fulfilling the first step of this argument. They're doing it for selfish motivation, for money, for honor, out of just interest in the subject. They never graduate. They go to the grave without having ever reached that second stage. How could the Talmud say it's a guarantee that you'll reach that second stage? So number one, I think I know counterexamples. And number two, I think psychologically, if you do something for the sake of a payoff, the more you do it for the sake of the payoff, the more ingrained getting the payoff becomes. Why should you think that? You just sort of lose the motivation for the payoff, and it will carry itself. Someone who works for IBM for 40 years, then retires. He doesn't go to the office the next day and work for nothing because he's been working for IBM. He doesn't come to do it for nothing. No, he sits home and does other things. So I don't understand. I don't understand the psychological basis for it. I think I came to understand both of them. Part of first one on the basis of an essay of Rav Dessler. Now, I used to say this, and I made a mistake in saying it, so I will skip that stage. I'll try to say it the same way. It's based on something that Rav Salanta said. Who are we talking to here? Who is the Talmud addressing here? Is he addressing those professors in the university who aren't religious and who do it for the sake of money and reputation? They're not going to listen to the Talmud. Not talking to them. He's talking to a person who is a believer and pledges allegiance to God and to the system and everything else, and he wants to do the best possible job. And he's been taught that the best possible job is to study Torah and do the mitzvos lishma, and he's not there. So the Talmud says Here's what he should do. He should do it shalol lishma, for a selfish motivation. Who's talking to him? The representative of the system. The one who's telling him what God wants from him. So what's the orientation of the person who's asking the question? The orientation is, I want to come to do it lishma. That's why I'm asking. Because I know that doing it lishma is the highest possible service, and I'm not there. So I want to know how to get there. And the Talmud is telling him how to get there. So why is he now engaging in the mitzvah or the study of Torah for a source of motivation? He's doing that because he was told that that's how he'll get to doing it lishma. That's why he's doing it. That means he's putting the selfish motivation in place so as to outgrow it. He's putting it in as a temporary crutch. That's his intention in putting it in. Oh, that certainly doesn't fit the professors at the university. They aren't studying and teaching Talmud for money and for honor and out of interest, so as to come to do it lishma, for the love of the master of the world who created, who commanded it. That wasn't their purpose in doing it. So the professors are not counterexamples to the principle, because the principle doesn't apply to them. That's number one. Yeah.
But the simple fact of learning Talmud, if it's completely out of the frame of doing it for the sake of lishma, then it wouldn't apply to any of those examples following this argument.
I just said that the way I just explained it, it doesn't apply to those professors. That's what I just said. Now, what are you saying?
It seems to be that the statement says that the condition of being lo lishma could produce, even if it was for whatever the motive behind it, it doesn't mean it won't produce somehow.
Correct. I'm working from the other side. Here's a statement that says this is how it will always work. You're saying it might sometimes work. I agree, it might sometimes work. My problem was it says it will always work. Now these professors are doing it certainly shalol lishma, and it doesn't work for them. Answer: the principle only says this is a strategy for someone who wants to get to lishma, believes in the system, feels he's inadequate because he hasn't gotten there, and here's a strategy for him within the system to get there. So obviously he's motivated to do this because he wants to get to lishma, right? Now, let's say he does this. I'll give you an example. Minyan is at 7:30. Okay, so in order to get the minyan on time, I have to get up at 7. Yeah, but getting up at 7 is kind of hard sometimes. And my alarm clock has a snooze button, guys. I know how to buy alarm clocks, it rings, bang, down for another 15 minutes. And I get up at 8 o'clock or 8:30, so I think to myself, that's not right. I don't want to do that. I want to get there on time because it's important to daven with the minyan. Okay. So I say to myself, how could I do this? I'll tell you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell Ruvain, I'm going to convince Ruvain that we should study for 10 minutes before praying. 7:20. We'll get together at 7:20 and study for 10 minutes before we start the davening. Okay, now my alarm goes off at 10 to 7. 10 to 7, not 7, 10 to 7. And I hear the alarm go, and I think, where's that snooze button? But then I think, wait a minute. If I press the snooze button, I don't go down, Ruben's going to be there at 7:20, and I'm not going to be there. That's going to be very embarrassing. I grit my teeth, and I say, okay, I'll get out of bed. And I go down. Now, time for a quiz. Pay attention. Why am I going downstairs at 7:20?
For fear of embarrassment.
What's that again?
For fear of embarrassment.
That's not a completely correct answer.
For a show.
Why do you say that? Wasn't it my gritting my teeth because I don't want to be embarrassed in front of Ruvain?
Who cares about Ruvain?
I care about my embarrassment, and I think you do too. You care about your embarrassment. Don't try to tell me you don't care about being embarrassed.
I try not to care about other people, me personally.
You made a commitment. It's not a question of somebody else's opinion. You told him you'll meet him right? You promised him, and you're going to welch on your promise. Right? No, but you're forgetting the story I just told you. You go back over the last 180 seconds and think of the things that I told you. That's not a completely correct answer, yeah?
To get there at 7:30, you're waking up at 6:15.
Why did I make the appointment with Ruvain? Why?
So you have more motivation to wake up and to go to
What key words did you just say?
motivation.
No. The key word you said is more. More. My motivation to start with was to get there at 7:30 to daven. I know that's right, and I want to do that. I just don't win the battles often enough that I'm not consistent about it. So my first motivation was to get there to daven at 7:30. Now, knowing that motivation alone isn't enough to get me there often, so then I add to it the motivation of not being embarrassed in front of Ruvain. So what's getting me there at 7:20 is two things together, two motivations working together. One is to get there to David, and the other is not to be embarrassed by Ruvain. And the embarrassment of Ruvain was put in place because of my desire to get there on time. So my desire to get there on time, first of all, is half of the motivation that gets me there at 7:20. And it's also what motivated me to put the selfish motivation in place. That's when the Talmud says you'll outgrow it. That says it has nothing to do with the professors at the university. They didn't have either of those, that background. Right? That's right. To understand what the principle is saying, you can see that the counterexamples I was worried about aren't counterexamples. Yeah.
So if he just keeps doing that, and all else would stay equal, then presumably if by accident Ruvain was to call and cancel on him, then he wouldn't go because he would just lose. But there's something that's bringing change across while he's doing this in the state that he can manage it as a composite. What's mediating that change over time?
Okay, that's exactly the second question. That's the question the other question that I asked, because I didn't see the psychological process by which it's supposed to work. But then I figured out what that is. I figured out because one of the things I used to do was I was a musician and I performed many times in classical music. Now, let's imagine you have a 5-year-old, and because you are a Jewish parent, you obey the 11 commandments. The 11th commandment is thy child shall play a musical instrument. Every child shall play a musical instrument. And let's take the worst possible case. You're going to start with violin. I say it's the worst possible case because a beginner on the violin makes noise. Noise, noise. It's just noise. It's awful. It sounds awful. The scratching and the groaning of the strings. It's just awful, right? And the parents know it's awful, and the teachers know it's awful, and the child knows it's awful also. The child is not under any illusions. It sounds terrible, right? Well, what's going to get the child to do it? Well, Jewish motivation. You better do it or else. Or you offer positive reinforcement, whatever it is, right? This goes on for a year, goes on for 2 years, but after a while, it doesn't sound awful anymore. After a while, it begins to sound like music. And the child is making music, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful. After a while, the incentives go away. You don't need any incentives. You outgrow the incentives. Aha! This is what we were looking for. We were looking for a psychological process which starts with incentives, and you outgrow the incentives. I said you work for IBM for 40 years. You're not going to go there when you retire, when you're not getting paid anymore. But here's something which, when you're not being paid, you will do, because you're making music. And music, for most people, resonates in the personality. There are very deep things that music produces. Try to do serious athletics. A lot of people listen to music when they do it. When you're running for distance and for strength, and you listen to music, you have much more energy when you listen to music than when you're not listening to music. And people who have trouble controlling their limbs, or well, I think it's called spastic or something else. When music is playing, they become very, very graceful. The music reaches into a person's psyche in ways that I think we don't understand well at all. Okay, now let's understand that the mitzvos come from the Creator, who created the human being with his experience, with his emotions, with his intellect, with the whole thing. And in essence, There's a hand-in-glove fit between the human being and the mitzvos, but not when you're clumsy, not when you don't understand what you're doing, not when it's all strange, you're not fluent, you're not in charge of the performance. Then, yes, it's going to be difficult. That's like the 2-month student of the violin who's just making noise. It takes time. So that's a psychological mechanism which can bring a person from doing it for the sake of a reward to do it without the need for a reward. Just like playing the instrument goes from the need for a reward to without the need for a reward. So this statement in the Talmud, I think, am I plumbing the statement in the Talmud? Certainly not. But it just shows you that there's tremendous wisdom there. And just to make the final superficial point, you get to the wisdom by asking questions. I didn't just say, well, the Talmud says so, and go on to the next thing. I said the Talmud says so, so it's got to be right. But I want to understand why it's right. I thought I had counterexamples, and I thought I had a problem with the mechanism, and it took me a long time to figure these things out. Didn't happen overnight. Part of it came from an essay of testers, and part of it I figured out on my own. It's worthwhile to ask questions. Don't put your intellect on the doorstep when you walk into the basement. Yeah.
By violin, it sounds like once you get good enough at it, you draw out the beauty or the desirable element within the activity itself. So what is that for lishma? What is it that you're drawing out once you become good at the practices that are attached to that, which makes the activity worthwhile in of itself?
Okay, it's not...
It's not one-to-one.
Yeah, well, no, but your words, if I take them seriously, are a little bit inconsistent and could be very misleading. In the activity itself, well, it depends on what you would define as the activity. And part of the activity is doing the will of the creator of the universe, and if you have a sense of gratitude and love for the creator, so then that's something which is it's part of your relationship with the creator. But how can I give an example? If you've never played baseball, and your parent says, "This is good for you. Go out there, take a bat, and hit the ball." Hit the ball, and then they tell you, "Just look at the ball." Wait a minute. I have to hit the ball with the stick. How am I going to hit the ball with the stick? I'm just looking at the ball. How's the stick going to get to the ball? I'm just looking at the ball. Yeah. It just works that way. Somehow. You look at the ball, and then you swing the stick, and the stick hits the ball, right? Sometimes anyway, and sometimes it doesn't. So you love let's say your father's telling you to do this, you love your father, and you want to please him, but boy, is this a difficult job. You don't feel connected, you don't feel fluent, you don't feel competent. After a while, when you hit the ball over the fence, then it's a different experience, how you relate to your father in the baseball game. Because now you can do it. Now you feel comfortable with it. Now you feel competent at doing it. So the relationship with the father is there at the beginning, but you're frustrated by the fact that you can't do it well, that you don't feel fluent and competent in it. So the relationship is there, but you can't express the relationship in an integrated way because you can't do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. So part of what you learn is how to do the mechanics fluently, and then you study the background for the mitzvah. What is it supposed to accomplish? For every mitzvah, it's a gigantic literature. You study the background for the mitzvah, and that cements the relationship in the doing. Okay, so that's the Rambam says. He says, nevertheless, because he stressed the fact that you want to get to doing it lishma. Nevertheless, the way to get to doing it lishma is doing it shelo lishma. The Koch of Yitzchak is the one who says that he stresses it says always. You have to always do it. Now, the Rambam here speaks about learning Torah. Other sources talk about learning Torah and performing mitzvos. I'm not sure that I could explain why the Rambam takes this particular statement as for the learning of Torah. But of course, if he's learning Torah, the Torah is telling him what he's supposed to be doing, and that's part of doing it. Part of learning Torah is to find out what to do. So that could be that's included. At any rate, therefore, he says, when one teaches children, women, and common people, we said this last time. I guess I skipped that little part beforehand. They become accustomed to doing it, and gradually they grasp it. They turn God out of love, which is Lishma. Okay, paragraph 5. It's a well-known and clear matter that the love of God will not become attached within a person's heart until he becomes obsessed with it at all times, as is fitting, leaving all things in the world except for this. Now, we have to be very, very careful about this. That's what we talked about before, about the split heart and the heart that can be divided. This was implied by the command, love your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Now, I told you, the idea that you can only love God, and that if you love anything else, you're compromising your love of God, can't be right. It can't be right because God told you to love other things. So, He's not going to, God didn't set up a system in which, so to speak, he's shooting himself in the foot. I'm telling you to do A, and A is impossible, and therefore, right? So, what this has to mean is, number one, don't reserve any part of your heart for something else other than God. That you certainly shouldn't do. Love Him with your whole heart. And then when it says to abandon everything else, leaving all other things in the world, let me just see exactly what the Hebrew says here. To avoid, to abandon everything else in the world other than it, I think that has to mean anything else in the world that's going to take away part of your heart from loving God. But it doesn't mean that you can't love other things. I told you about the Chafetz Chaim's hesped for his son who died. So this is very troubling. There is a report the Chafetz Chaim had a son who died. And there's a report that at the hesped he said, I'm grateful that now I can devote my whole heart to God. Now, I don't know how accurate the report is and where the report came from and whether it was exact, accurate, and which language he was speaking in, how it was translated, all of that I don't know. But as I said to you, it can't mean that because I loved my son, I couldn't love God with my whole heart. And now that I don't have my son to love, I can love God with my whole heart because God commanded him to love his son. And God doesn't shoot himself in the foot. It could mean that, yes, God commanded me to love him, but I loved my son in a way that goes beyond the command to love another person. I added to it a certain type of affection, attachment, that went beyond. This would be the Chafetz Chaim confessing in public that his love for his son wasn't within the boundaries that the Torah commands, which I think would be peculiar, but maybe it did happen that way. I could imagine that, conceive that it happened that way. And now, since my relationship with my son called out of me a level of love that goes beyond what the Torah required, and that could compromise my love of God, so now I'm happy that I can recover from that. I suppose that's conceivable. But the bottom line is, since the Torah itself, God Himself commands us to love other things, in particular other Jews, it can't mean I have to abandon that. Only things which will compromise my love of God. And that's why he quotes the verse which says, love God with all your heart, with all your soul. Now he says, and here the text in the Hebrew is difficult because there are different girsas. One can only love God as an outgrowth of the knowledge with which he knows Him. The nature of one's love depends upon the nature of one's knowledge. A small amount of knowledge is a lesser love. A greater amount of knowledge arouses a greater love. I think this is true, and it's not too difficult to understand. You can't love an unknown. Just think of that. There is something which is very great at something. What is the something? Not telling you. What is it great at? Not telling you. But it's very great. I'm commanding you to love it. I don't think that's possible. Love requires understanding, sharing, a sense of respect for what it is, a sense of the preciousness of what it is for what it is. Love often requires an interaction, and interaction means you know what's coming from that thing, and you know what its purposes are, because it's not enough just to receive good if the thing is trying to undermine you and crush you in the end. Love is based on understanding. So what Rambam is saying here is a very natural thing to say in any relationship. The idea that some other philosophies teach that you should try to have love for everyone, and maybe even equal love for everyone, I think is just utterly unrealistic. You can't love a stranger in the same way that you love a comrade, a colleague, a partner, where you share the same goals, the same ideals, the same priorities. You're working together in partnership on the same project. The stranger is someone about whom you know much less, and because you know much less, you can't have the same type of love relationship with him. So the Rambam is saying here that knowledge of God is what mediates love of God. And indeed, in the second chapter of the Fundamentals of Torah, the second paragraph, where he talks about how you get to love and awe of God, he says you get to love of God by studying what he does. By studying what he does, you get to know him. That's what mediates your love of God. So the Rambam here is telling you two things. The one thing is one which I think is very publicized, and because you only hear the one, you misunderstand his intent. You say, well, okay, yeah, the Rambam is a philosopher, and the philosopher of knowledge is everything, and therefore he stresses that you have to have knowledge. And that's the Rambam because he, and those who pretend they think they know what's going on, they call him a closet Aristotelian, all the rest of that. But that's dead wrong. The mitzvah here is to love him. And he tells you that the love is according to the knowledge, which means the knowledge alone isn't it. It isn't it. It's the love that you're commanded to have. And the knowledge is what mediates the love. So if you're thinking of the philosopher who could have knowledge without love, he's a failure. He's a failure. He's a Jewish cripple if he has knowledge without love. It's just that the knowledge is necessary for the love, and to a certain extent the knowledge will produce love because it's the knowledge which gives you the understanding of the qualities which are lovable qualities, which draw out love as a response. So, yeah.
What if a person understands like the qualities that the Torah talks about that Hashem has, but he doesn't see in his own life these qualities? How is he expected to kind of copy the qualities into his own experience?
Yeah, this is a very good question because my rabbis and I were talking the other day about the things that where God communicated to Moses by showing him something, not just by telling him. And one of them is prayer. It says that Hashem demonstrated to Moses how to pray when saying the 13 attributes of mercy. He showed a vision of wearing a talis and standing like a leader of prayer and saying them. And when Moses says to God, Hareini na'as drachecha, show me your ways. Doesn't say teach me your ways. Doesn't say tell me your ways. Doesn't describe me your ways. Just show them to me. So if you don't experience them, there's a definitely dimension missing. And when you're talking about love, to just read about it may not be enough. So I think it's a good question, and I don't think I have a complete grasp of the answer, so you should ask other people as well. One thing to do is to look at historical cases where people lived long periods of time where they didn't see it, and yet were faithful because they believed it, and then in the end they came to see it. So that means that that's a dynamic that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses in the world. You know, Avram and Sarah, you're going to have a child. When? Not telling you. Not telling you. Decades go by. That Abraham has one when he's 86, and she still doesn't have a child. And then, when he's 100, she's 90, they have the child. What sustained them all the time until then? Okay, other things happened. But, and then they both became physically incapable. The truth is, according to the oral tradition, they were both physically incapable before. But when you reach that age, it's a physical incapability that everybody shares. So, in the end, they saw it. So, this is a normal procedure in the way God deals with the world, that you have it and you don't see it. Now you read about what happened to them, and you say, well, okay, so that's how God runs the world. And that being the case, that could be the way He's running the world with me as well. It's not as strong as actually seeing it. That's true. It isn't as strong as actually seeing it. And then you can talk to contemporary people. I have a son, one of whose sons had terrible combination of medical disabilities, and he went to specialists in America, and when there was a specialist conference here in Israel, they took 15 cases from the whole country, and he was one of the cases. And he tried experimental, non-conventional therapies, and nothing worked. And this was a syndrome similar to Crohn's syndrome, which meant tremendous problems in the digestive apparatus, plus seizures, both. Were the seizures epilepsy? Some said yes, some said no. He was the best specialist here. They couldn't agree. They couldn't agree on a therapy. And he would spend weeks in the hospital, and the parents were in the hospital over the holidays and everything else. But it went away. Just went away. For the last 5 years, he's been perfectly normal. Not only that, but outstanding. The doctors, they haven't got a clue. They just haven't got a clue. They cannot explain it. But I went through it indirectly because I'm a grandparent, but my son and his wife went through it directly. And what they get from doctors is we'd have to call it a miracle because there's no way we can explain it. They didn't expect anyone with that syndrome to just recover. And it happened. So they lived through the stress and the worry and the anguish, right? And then they saw it happen. Now, they're my children, so I saw it happen also. So I know these things do happen. But I'm in an advanced age when it happened. And so if you talk to people to whom things like this have happened, you can also, and then sometimes people don't even recognize when it happens to them, and then they look, think back and say, well, yeah, that certainly did happen to me also. So you can have experiences or share the experiences of others who have experienced this sort of thing, and that can fill it in terms of your own experience. Read biographies. I think it was Rabbi Akiva Eger who, when he was a teenager, heard his parents talking, and he heard them, one saying to the other, "What's going to be with him? He's just not cut out for learning. He's not making any progress in learning. Maybe he could be a shoemaker. Maybe we can find him something to do." He became one of the greatest scholars in the last 200 years. Right? But he started off in a very low position. I think it was Elchanan Wasserman who also, as a teenager, was just not getting it. And in despair, he went into the shul when nobody was there, and he opened up the Aron Kodesh, and he put his head inside and said, "God, make me smart. I can't do it. I just can't do it." And that was his turning point. So you see people who have these turning points, and where HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers their prayers in ways which are very difficult to explain in natural terms. So maybe that can help. Yeah.
How does God decide when to show those miracles?
You know better than to ask that question, right?
Like, is it just
He takes everything into account, which is an infinity of information which we don't have. How am I going? I'm going to tell you what his rules are. You know you can't do that. Yeah.
So, in the Jewish tradition, we are given a certain order of maasim, right? And then through learning, we get to understand them. And that formula is the one that will bring us to Lishma, right? That would be like the main, like Naseh, and then learn to have a understatement, and that formula will just produce by itself the love to the creator of the world. That's kind of what Rambam is perhaps.
That's what it's saying. He's taking the statement from the Talmud, right, even though he himself said that not all the sages get there. So, yeah.
So you said that the love emerges when you achieve knowledge of the, let's say, lovable qualities. So does the yira emerge when you achieve knowledge of the qualities that are more difficult to accept? How does the yira emerge as a result of knowledge, or is yira more correspondent to lack of knowledge?
Oh, if you look there in the second chapter of the laws of fundamentals of Torah, it's the study that produces both. But the yira there is where you come to know and understand, and you come to feel close, and then you take account of what those qualities are and how you compare to those qualities. And you realize that you are, infinitely removed from those qualities. You feel small and insignificant and incompetent and all the rest. And the Rambam describes it as a pendulum. The knowledge reveals qualities that draw you, and then you feel how distant you are from those qualities, and he says, Nir tela acharaf. It's thrust backwards. So it's like a pendulum. And someone criticized someone else on the grounds that you're telling me that the Jewish growth is like, that love and fear of God is a pendulum. And my reading of the Psalms and other passages is where love and fear of God can be integrated into a single system, and they can be stable, and they can be, exalting, and so forth and so on. And I realized after many years of thinking about this that the person misread what the Rambam was talking about. The Rambam says this is the way you get there, not what it's like when you've achieved it. They're not the same thing. The process of getting there can be a process of a pendulum. But that doesn't mean that you remain on a pendulum. It doesn't mean you don't get to a position where you can't fully integrate both. It's only the process of developing them, not what it's like when you have them and developed. Okay, so now he says, it means that a means for increasing your love is increased study, which now is the study of understanding God, understanding who God is. Now, I just want to say that, understanding God, that sounds like theology. I'd rather sleep than do that, or maybe eat a steak. Theology? But that's not the right way to understand it. Because although theology is necessary, theological ideas are necessary, but the Rambam himself says in the guide that when you know God's means of action, you are knowing Him. And he bases this on an explicit verse in the Torah, which again means that the philosopher thinks in terms of philosophy is terribly superficial and misleading. Because it says, the verse that I quoted before, show me your ways, which means your ways of action. And the next word in the verse is, ve'eda'acha, and I will know you. And the Rambam quotes that. So apparently, knowing his ways of action is knowing him. Now, think a little. It doesn't mean knowing everything about him. It doesn't mean knowing his essence. But it isn't like knowing something different from him. It's knowing this about him. The object of knowledge here is him. Only there are different types of knowledge, and they give you different access to this object of knowledge. But it's not knowing something else. Not knowing his house, not knowing his investments, it's knowing him. So studying his Torah, studying the Torah that he commanded us, that's a vast set of his actions. It doesn't have to be only the sun rays and the faces of the moon and the agricultural cycles. That's all things that he made, but he made the Torah too. So studying the Torah is something which is coming, which will be again a way of knowing him, and knowing him is the medium that's going to create the love. So that's definitely included. Yeah.
Is it possible to know in the same way a person's essence, or is it just only possible to know his actions in the same?
No, that's a very good question, and the Rambam talks about that in great detail. You see, let's take actions, okay? In a person, his actions come from his personality, from his character traits. The Creator doesn't work that way. The Rambam says explicitly that when we speak about, let's say, the motivations for God's action or the character traits from which they come, they're not meant literally. When you say that God is merciful, what you mean is that God does things which, when a human being does them, would come out of the human being's mercy. But it doesn't mean that God has mercy. God is beyond all character, all personality, and all character traits. That's just anthropomorphism, which isn't literally correct. So we have words for God's actions, but when the words for the actions describe character traits out of which actions flow, what's meant is God does an action which, when a human being does it, comes out of this human character trait, but not that he has that character trait. Rambam says that in great, explicit detail. So what I know, however, is that these are his actions. Ramchal has a page where he talks about this, where it's quite a difficult page, the beginning of Klal Rishonim. What is the relationship between an actor and an agent? If you're a philosopher, what the metaphysics, what is the difference? What's the relationship between an actor and an agent? The agent's action isn't like his coat. You can't peel the action off the agent and stand it separately and put the agent over here and the action over there. You can do that with his coat, you can do that with his car, you can do that with his house. But the action is a presentation of the agent. So it's an aspect of the agent, which is, like his height and his weight and his skin color. You can't peel those off the agent. That's something that is integral to the agent. Of course, it's not the same as his mind, not the same as his values, but it is not something which is separate from the agent. It's an aspect of the agent himself. I think that's connected to the idea that when you know a person's actions, you know the something about the person himself. Now, sometimes it happens with a person where you know his agent and you don't know what his motivation is. You don't know why he's doing that. So you don't know where in his character is coming from. You know because he's human, it's coming from somewhere in his character. You don't know where it's coming from. Still, you know this is what he did, or this is what he does. And that's something about him. That's something about his car. So you're still knowing something about the agent. But usually, with a human being, you can go much deeper than that. You can go to his character as well. And strictly speaking, God doesn't have character in that way. So there's no deeper to go to. Yeah.
We say, or the Rambam says that by knowledge, Hashem doesn't have less than knowledge, right? That we can't reduce it past that. It's beyond, but we can't reduce it past. So why can't we say that?
No, those words are ambiguous. That means that he has knowledge, but he has much more than knowledge. No.
So
he has all the capacities that knowledge would give.
Yes.
That's the way my son said it, yeah.
Can't we say that also by traits like mercy or by din or so on, that you could apply it similarly, or would that only...
Well, the similarly now is only to what you said, what you rejected. In knowledge, it's that he can do everything that a possessor of knowledge can do. But he doesn't do what he does by possessing knowledge. So you could say that he will do everything that a merciful, a being that possesses mercy as a quality would do, but he doesn't do it with mercy.
I didn't understand that well till now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This is now the final thing I wanted to tell you was, why is this in Hilchos Teshuva? Because Teshuva means returning to a position, and that position is to be in an ideal relationship with God. So you may say, well, was I ever in an ideal relationship with God? So some commentaries say say that this is the way the soul was before it came into the world. Before it came into the world. But the Rambam, as I told you a few days ago, someone challenged me, where do you find dvekus in the Rambam? Dvekus is a modern, Mussar term. But the Rambam uses the word mudbak in chapter 7. Mudbak is dvekus, it's the same word. Connected, attached to God. That's what he's talking about. He's describing in chapter 10 what it means to be attached to God. This is what it means to be attached. And Hilchos Teshuva is getting to that attachment. That's what Teshuva is supposed to produce. Remember what he said in chapter 7. Yesterday, before the person did Teshuva, God was disgusted with him and rejected him and crushed the certain mitzvahs that he did. We said certain mitzvahs. And rejected his prayers and so forth and so on. And now he's beloved. God delights in him. And he's mudbak. He's attached. So chapter 10, I believe, is the description of what attached means. Being loving God, and then from which comes as Rambam says, automatically the motivation to do the mitzvahs out of love, and loving God as the master of the world who commanded it, and that's emes, that what he commands is the greatest, the ultimate pinnacle of value, and the greatest of reality. And that's when you do the emes because it's emes. That's the description of dvekus, and that's what you're supposed to be returning to. That's, I think, why this is in Hilchos Teshuva. Gentlemen, for me, it's a privilege to be part of this institution, as I have been for 42 years. A great part of it is teaching the wonderful students who are here. We have a wonderful Yom Kippur and a wonderful Sukkot, and I hope to see you when we start the new session after in Kislev.
Amen.